My mother kicked me out of my own house at 17 to live with her boyfriend. Now I came back as the owner, changed the locks, and gave them 2 weeks to leave. The pregnant stepdaughter begged, but I called the police. I'm 25 years old. I work at an accounting firm, and honestly, I need to tell this story because I've been getting messages for days from uncles, cousins, and even people I didn't even know were family, all telling me I'm a heartless monster. The thing is that like 2 weeks ago, I changed the locks on a house that's technically been mine since I was 15, and my mom and her boyfriend were living there, and well, you can imagine things got ugly. But for you to understand why I did what I did, I have to tell you everything from the beginning. When my dad died, and basically my life went to hell. My dad, Christopher, died when I was 15. It was a massive heart attack, one of those that gives no warning, you know? He was fine one day and the next he just didn't wake up. I remember my mom, Rebecca, screamed so loud that morning that the neighbors called the police, thinking someone was being attacked. I was in my room and I heard everything. That sound stayed with me forever, like it's impossible to forget the moment when your world falls apart. My dad was everything to me. I mean, we were super close. He took me to his job sites, he worked in construction and had his own small company, taught me how to use tools, always told me that someday everything he had built was going to be mine. I never thought someday would come so soon. What happened after the funeral was kind of weird, honestly. Turns out my dad had made a super specific will like 2 years before he died. I don't know if he had some kind of premonition or was just one of those organized guys who plans everything. The lawyer called us like a week after the burial and explained that my dad had left absolutely everything to me. All the properties, we had the house where we lived, plus 2 apartments he rented out, his savings, his 2010 Ford truck, everything. My mom got nothing because, and this is important, they were never officially married. They lived together for like 17 years, had me, but never signed any papers. My dad explained in the will that he trusted I would take care of her, that it was my responsibility to make sure she was okay, but legally everything was mine. My mom went crazy when she heard that. Not in front of the lawyer, obviously, but in the car on the way back home, she told me my dad had been selfish. How could he leave her with nothing after so many years? I was 15 years old. I didn't understand much about laws or money, but I told her that obviously she could keep living in the house, and I wasn't going to change anything. I thought that would be enough, that things would eventually go back to normal. How naive I was. Seriously. The first few months after my dad died were horrible. As you'd expect, I was in my sophomore year of high school, trying to process that I was never going to see my dad again, that we were never going to go out for breakfast on Sundays or watch soccer games together. My mom seemed to be dealing with grief in her own way, or so I thought. Turns out her way of dealing with it was meeting Gerald like 4 months after the funeral. 4 months. Can you believe it? I know everyone has their own process, and I'm not going to judge how people handle death, but it was super fast, too fast for my taste. Gerald showed up at my house, well, my house technically, on a Saturday morning when I was like 16. My mom told me, "Ryan, I want you to meet someone," as if it was the most casual thing in the world. This guy was like 48 years old, sold auto parts or something like that, and had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Christina, who was 17 at the time, and Trevor, who was 16, my age. From the first moment, I felt Gerald looked at me weird, like with that attitude of, I'm going to bring order to this house, you know, as if he was the new authority figure. I shook his hand out of courtesy, but inside I was thinking, who the hell is this guy, and why is he in my living room? Things got weird really fast. Gerald started coming over more and more, often, and like after 2 months he basically already lived with us. They never asked me if I was okay with it. It just happened. And the worst part is he brought his kids too. Not to live permanently, but they came every weekend and stayed in what was the guest room. My mom was like in a cloud, all happy and acting as if we were a normal family, as if my dad hadn't died less than a year ago. I tried talking to her a couple of times, telling her everything was moving too fast, that I needed time to process. But she always came back with that I needed to be more understanding, that she had the right to be happy, that Gerald was a good man. And technically, yeah, Gerald wasn't bad at first. It was just uncomfortable having him there, occupying my dad's place. But then he started to change. Gerald started acting like he owned the house. He'd tell me things like, make sure you turn off the lights when you leave a room, or don't leave your shoes in the living room, things my dad would never have told me in such an authoritarian way. And my mom supported him. She always supported him. If I complained, she'd say, Gerald was just trying to help, that I was too sensitive. What hurt me most was when they'd make family plans and not include me. Like, the four of them would go out, my mom, Gerald, Christina, and Trevor, to eat or to the movies, and they wouldn't even tell me. I'd get home and the house would be empty. And then I'd find out from Facebook photos that they'd all gone out together. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake, but when it became a habit, I understood they were excluding me on purpose. I put up with it as best I could during that whole year. I focused on school, hung out with my friends, tried not to be home much, but the situation exploded when I was 17. I was in my last year of high school. Gerald started complaining that I wasn't contributing financially to the house, that I was old enough and should have a job. I reminded him that, technically, it was my house, that I was the owner, and that made him really angry. He told me that being the owner on paper didn't mean anything if I didn't know how to maintain a property, that the electricity and water bills kept coming, that someone had to pay. I told him he could leave whenever he wanted if he didn't like the situation, that no one had invited him to live there in the first place. My mom heard that part of the argument, and it was the first time she really yelled at me after my dad died. She told me I was ungrateful, that she had sacrificed everything for me, that Gerald was part of the family now and I had to respect him. The tension in the house became unbearable after that. Gerald and I basically didn't talk to each other. We just looked at each other with disgust when we passed in the hallway. My mom was always in a bad mood, angry at me for not accepting the situation, angry at Gerald when he crossed the line. And Christina and Trevor, Gerald's kids, acted like the house was theirs too, like they'd leave their stuff everywhere, use the kitchen like it was nothing. Trevor even came into my room once without permission looking for a charger. I was counting the days until I graduated and went to college. I thought that once I got out of there, things would get better, that I just had to hold on a little longer. But I didn't get to graduate living in that house. One night, it was like February or March, I don't remember exactly, I came home late from a party. It was like 2 inches the morning. Yeah, it was wrong for me to come home that late on a weeknight, I admit it. My mom was waiting for me in the living room, and Gerald was with her. They started yelling at me as soon as I walked through the door, that I was irresponsible, that I couldn't keep living there if I was going to act like that, all the typical sermon. But then my mom said something I'll never forget. She said maybe it would be better if you went to live with your grandparents for a while. You need to learn to value what you have. I asked her if she was serious, if she was really kicking me out of my own house, and she just stayed quiet looking at the floor. Gerald was the one who responded. He said, I think we all need a break. My mom, the woman who was supposed to protect me, always choose me, was kicking me out of the house my dad had left me so she and her boyfriend could live peacefully without me. I told her she couldn't do that legally the house was mine, and Gerald laughed and said, You're a minor, you can't do anything. And technically he was right. I couldn't sell the property or legally kick them out until I turned 18. The lawyer had explained that to me when we read the will. So that same night, I packed my things. The most important stuff I had, called my paternal grandparents, Phyllis and Bernard, and explained the situation to them. They came for me at like 4 inches the morning and got me out of there. Living with my grandparents literally saved me. They lived like 40 minutes from my school, but they did everything possible so I could finish high school without problems. My grandpa Bernard drove me and picked me up every day. My grandma Phyllis made me lunch and made sure I did my homework. They treated me like I was their own son, and I think for them, somehow I was, because I was all they had left of my dad. They never spoke badly about my mom in front of me, although I know they were furious with her for what she had done. In fact, when I turned 18, my grandpa took me to a lawyer to review my whole legal situation with the properties and make sure everything was in order. During the following years, while I was in college studying accounting, I basically cut contact with my mom. She'd call me from time to time, especially on my birthday or Christmas, but the conversations were awkward and short. She never apologized for kicking me out, never acknowledged that she had chosen Gerald over her own son. I kept paying the basic bills for the house because technically it was my legal responsibility, but I wasn't going to visit them or want to know anything about them. My grandparents kept me informed of basic things, like that my mom and Gerald were still together, that Gerald's kids didn't live there anymore but visited often, things like that. I just wanted to focus on finishing my degree and starting my real life. I graduated last year, got a decent job at an accounting firm here in the city, and for the first time in years, I felt financially stable. The 2 apartments my dad left me were still rented and gave me a passive income that helped a lot. But the house where my mom and Gerald were living was kind of run down. My grandparents had told me it looked neglected, that the yard was a mess, that there were problems with the roof. I decided it was time to take real control of my property, that I had been generous, enough letting them live there for free all these years. I hired an architect and a contractor to evaluate the house and plan a complete renovation. The idea was to fix it up properly and then rent it out, or maybe sell it and use that money to buy my own place. I knew this meant my mom and Gerald had to leave, but honestly, I didn't feel bad about it. You know, they'd had 7 years living in my property without paying anything. I think that was more than enough. I waited for them to go on vacation. My grandpa told me Gerald and my mom were going to be away for like 10 days visiting his family in another state, and I took advantage of that time to go to the house and change all the locks. It was weird entering that house after so many years. Everything looked different. They had changed the furniture, painted the walls, put up pictures of Gerald and my mom everywhere. The room that was mine was now like an office or something, with a desk and a filing cabinet. There wasn't the photo of me in the whole house. It was as if I had never existed, as if my dad had never existed. I changed the locks on all the doors, the main one, the back one, the garage, and took the old keys with me. I left a note on the dining room table that said something like this: Mom, as you know, this property has been legally mine for 10 years. I've decided it's time to make use of it. You have 2 weeks to remove your belongings and find another place to live. After that time, I'm going to start with the renovations. If you need help with the move or any references for renting, let me know. Ryan. My mom called me like 50 times when they got back from their trip and realized they couldn't get into the house. I didn't answer the first calls because I knew she was just going to yell at me, but I finally answered, and it was basically half an hour of her crying and insulting me. She told me I was an unnatural son. How could I do this to her? That she was my mother and deserved respect. Gerald took the phone from her at one point and started yelling at me too, saying this was illegal, that he was going to sue me, that I couldn't just kick them out like that. I explained very calmly that the house was mine, that they had lived there for free for years, and that 2 weeks was more than enough time for them to find something. Gerald hung up the phone after insulting me some more. During those next few days, I didn't stop getting messages. My mom, Gerald, even Christina and Trevor wrote to me saying I was cruel, that I was destroying a family. But what surprised me most was when uncles and cousins from my mom's side started contacting me, people I hadn't talked to in years, all with the same message that I was a heartless, selfish person. My Aunt Sandra called me crying, saying, how could I leave my mom on the street, that she had raised me and sacrificed everything for me. I reminded her that she had kicked me out of that same house when I was 17 because her boyfriend was more important, but it didn't help. She just said, I was being vengeful and bitter. The second week, like 3 days before the deadline, my mom showed up at my apartment. She knocked on the door, crying, with really red and swollen eyes, and when I opened, she just hugged me and started apologizing. She said she had been a bad mother, that she knew she had failed me, that she was so sorry. For a moment, I'm not going to lie, I felt like maybe we could fix things. That maybe this was the moment when she finally understood what she had done. But then she started with the real reason for her visit. She told me that Christina, Gerald's daughter, was pregnant, that she was like 6 months along already, and that Trevor, Gerald's son, had just lost his job and was basically on the street. She begged me to give them more time, that I couldn't kick them out right now when everyone was in difficult situations. I asked her why Christina, who should be like 26 or 27 now, didn't have her own place, and my mom explained that she was living with the baby's father, but they had fought and she had to leave. And Trevor apparently had been living with a roommate but couldn't pay his part of the rent. The thing is, none of those problems were my responsibility. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, I felt somewhat sorry, especially for Christina who was pregnant, but at the same time, I didn't understand why I had to sacrifice my plans for people who had never treated me well. I told my mom I was sorry, but my decision was made. That 2 weeks was the time I had given them, and that wasn't going to change. My mom completely changed when she saw I wasn't going to give in. She started yelling at me again, saying my dad would be ashamed of me, that he never would have wanted me to be so cruel. That hurt. I'm not going to lie. Because my dad was everything to me, and thinking he might be disappointed affected me. But I also knew my dad had specifically left those properties to me, not to her, and that he trusted I would make the right decisions. I told her to leave my apartment or I was going to call security, and she finally left, but not before telling me she would never forgive me, that I had lost my mother forever. When the deadline day came, like exactly 2 weeks after I changed the locks, I went to the house with my grandparents and my lawyer. I thought they would have already left, but when we arrived, everyone was still there. My mom, Gerald, and to my surprise, there were also like 10 more people, relatives from both sides, all gathered in the yard because they couldn't get into the house. As soon as they saw me arrive, they started yelling at me, calling me everything. My Aunt Sandra was there with her husband, my cousin Javier too, Gerald's sister, several others I didn't even recognize. My mom was sitting on the porch steps crying, acting as if she was the victim of a great injustice. I approached, and everyone started talking at the same time. It was total chaos. Gerald got in front of me and said, "We weren't going to leave, that I'd have to remove them by force." My lawyer explained very professionally that if they didn't leave voluntarily, we were going to have to involve the police, and that wasn't going to be good for anyone. My mom got up and approached me with Christina, who was indeed very pregnant, like it was quite noticeable already. They told me to please reconsider, that they only needed a couple more months, 3 at most, until Christina had the baby, and they could get better organized. All the relatives started supporting that idea, saying that a few more months weren't going to make a difference to me. How could I be so insensitive to a pregnant woman? My cousin Javier told me I had a good job and my own apartment, that they really needed that place, while I only wanted it out of greed. My grandpa Bernard tried to defend me, but they shut him up between everyone, telling him he didn't understand the situation, to stay out of it. That's when I realized that no matter how much time I gave them, it was never going to be enough. There was always going to be another excuse, another problem, another reason why they needed to stay a little longer. I told them no, that they had to leave today, that they had already had 2 full weeks to look for something, that I had been very clear from the beginning. My mom started crying harder, saying they had nowhere to go, that she was going to have to sleep in her car. I reminded her that Gerald worked, and that between the two of them, they should have saved something in all these years, living without paying rent. I also told her I had been sending money for the electricity and water bills for years, that it wasn't like I had completely abandoned them. But none of that mattered to them. They just wanted me to give in, to feel guilty and let them stay. The confrontation lasted like an hour. Everyone tried to make me feel like the worst person in the world. They told me I was vengeful, that this was just my way of punishing my mom for kicking me out when I was a teenager, that I had never gotten over that. And maybe they were a little bit right. I mean, I'm not going to pretend there wasn't some resentment there. But it was also my property, my right, my future. Finally, my lawyer told me quietly that we could proceed with the legal eviction if they didn't cooperate, but that it was going to take time and be more complicated. I decided to give them one last chance to leave with dignity. I told them I'd give them until the end of the day, until 11 at night, to get all their stuff out, and that if by that time there was still anyone inside, I was going to call the police. Gerald said that was impossible, that they couldn't pack everything in a few hours. I told him to take the important stuff, and I could store the rest for a few days while they found a storage unit or something, but they couldn't keep sleeping there. Some of the relatives said that was the cruelest thing they had ever heard, but others, I think they were starting to realize I was serious, told my mom and Gerald they better start packing. They all finally left, with boxes and suitcases, making several trips throughout the afternoon. I stayed there with my grandparents waiting, making sure they actually left. Gerald came out at like 9 at night with the last box and threw the old keys at my feet, telling me he hoped I was happy, that I had gotten what I wanted. I didn't respond, just picked up the keys and waited for him to leave. My mom was the last one out. At like 10:30, she stood at the door and looked at me one last time, hoping maybe I'd change my mind at the last moment. I asked her where they were going to sleep that night, and she told me at a cheap motel for the moment that Gerald had some money saved, but not much. I gave her the address of a couple of places that rented apartments at reasonable prices, places I had researched precisely for this moment. She took the paper without saying anything and left. The days after were weird. The hate messages kept coming for a while, but eventually stopped. I hired a cleaning company to remove all the stuff that was left. There was quite a bit of trash, honestly, and then the renovations started. The contractor told me the house was worse than we thought. There were leaks in the roof, electrical problems, all the plumbing needed updating. Basically, it was going to cost like double what I had initially budgeted, but it was worth it because once finished, I was going to be able to rent it for good money. It's been like 3 weeks since all that. My mom sent me a message a few days ago, just to tell me they found a place. A small apartment where Gerald, her, Christina, and the baby when it's born are going to live together. She told me she's disappointed in me, that she never thought her son could be so cold, but that she understands I've already made my decision. I didn't respond. Honestly, I don't know what to tell her. Part of me feels guilty, especially when I think about Christina and the baby. But another part feels I finally did something for myself, that I stopped allowing them to manipulate and use me. My grandparents tell me I did the right thing, that my dad would be proud that I finally took control of what was mine. I'm not completely sure about that, but I do know I needed to do this. I needed to close that chapter of my life. The house is going to be ready in like 2 months, and I already have several people interested in renting it. With that extra money, I'm finally going to be able to start saving to buy my own place, something that's truly mine, without all this heavy history behind it. I guess that's what matters in the end, right? Moving forward, building your own life, even if it means leaving behind people you thought would always be there for you.